The Secret Life of Cleopatra. Love and Betrayal. Introduction. Welcome to Chrono Nights. Tonight, we journey back through time, far into the realms of ancient Greece and Egypt, a world of myth and legend, where mighty gods walked alongside mortals and where the fate of empires could rest in the hands of a single woman. This is the story of Cleopatra VII, a queen whose extraordinary intelligence, fierce ambition, and undeniable charisma captivated two of the most powerful men of her time. Her life, shaped by politics and passion, has echoed through the centuries. So lie back, close your eyes, and take a slow, gentle breath. Let yourself drift into the ancient world as we explore together the secret life of Cleopatra, a journey through power, love, betrayal, and legacy. Chapter 1. Cleopatra's Egypt, Land of the Nile. By the time Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE, the grandeur of ancient Egypt stretched far into the past. The pyramids were already ancient, the temples weathered by centuries of sand and wind. Gods like Ra, Isis, and Osiris had watched over the Nile Valley for more than 3,000 years. But Egypt was no longer ruled by native pharaohs. It had come under the control of the Ptolemies, a Macedonian Greek dynasty founded after the death of Alexander the Great. Cleopatra's family had ruled for nearly 300 years, not from Thebes or Memphis, but from Alexandria, a gleaming coastal city built by Alexander himself. The Ptolemies lived like Greek monarchs. They spoke Greek, followed Hellenistic customs, and treated Egypt as a personal inheritance. They were known for palace intrigue, incestuous marriages, and deadly succession struggles, and few of them even bothered to speak the Egyptian language. Cleopatra, however, would be the exception. From a young age, she showed a deep fascination with Egyptian culture. According to Plutarch, she was the first of her dynasty to speak the Egyptian tongue, along with many others. She studied philosophy, science, history, and religion. Her tutors were likely drawn from the scholars of the Library of Alexandria, one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. She was not just being trained to wear a crown, she was preparing to rule. And the Egypt she would one day rule was still beautiful, but fragile. The Nile still flooded each year, bringing fertility and life to the valley. Farmers depended on its rhythm, priests tended the temples, artisans painted tombs and carved statues. But behind the scenes, Egypt's economy was increasingly entangled with Rome, the rising superpower of the Mediterranean. Roman generals, merchants, and moneylenders watched Alexandria with hungry eyes. Cleopatra grew up knowing that Egypt's independence was delicate. Its wealth was admired and desired. Its grain filled Roman bellies. Its ports supplied Roman fleets. And any sign of weakness could invite intervention or invasion. She also learned that the Ptolemaic court was no place for innocence. Her family history was steeped in blood. Siblings had poisoned one another, mothers had turned on daughters, fathers had banished their own sons. The palace in Alexandria may have been filled with marble, gold, and scholars, but it was also a place where trust was rare and survival required sharp wit and sharper instinct. Yet even in this dangerous environment, Cleopatra found strength. She was observant, patient. She learned when to speak and when to remain silent. She saw how appearances could be shaped, how alliances could be forged, and how even the most powerful men could be influenced, not by force, but by intellect. She also came to understand Egypt not just from above, but from within. It is said she walked among her people, not in grand processions, but in plain dress, listening to their concerns. She worshipped in Egyptian temples, paid homage to Egyptian gods, and embraced her image as the living embodiment of Isis, the divine mother and queen. And so, Beneath the sunlit courtyards and shadowed colonnades of Alexandria, a young princess grew into a queen-in-waiting. Not a figurehead, not a puppet of Greek tradition, but a ruler who would walk between two worlds, the Hellenistic and the Egyptian, the ancient and the imperial. Her time had not yet come, but already Egypt was whispering her name. Chapter 2. Birth and Childhood, a Princess in Alexandria. Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BCE, most likely in the royal palace of Alexandria, a complex that sprawled along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Though the palace itself has long since vanished beneath the waves, in her lifetime it was a place of marble columns, perfumed gardens, and echoing halls, a symbol of Ptolemaic wealth and ambition. She was born into a dynasty known less for its wisdom than for its ruthless infighting. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was viewed by many as weak and indulgent. He loved music, hence the nickname flute player, and he relied heavily on bribes to maintain his position, particularly from powerful Roman politicians. The Egyptian priesthood mistrusted him. The people resented the taxes used to fund his diplomacy, and his own court was a viper's nest of betrayal. As a child, Cleopatra would have seen firsthand how fragile royal power could be. Little is known for certain about her mother. Some historians believe she was Cleopatra V Tryphena, possibly Ptolemy XII's sister or cousin, who disappears from historical records shortly after Cleopatra's birth. Whether through death, disgrace, or quiet political maneuvering, her absence left a gap and a lesson. In the Ptolemaic dynasty, even queens could vanish. Amid this volatile court, Cleopatra began her education. The Ptolemaic tradition valued learning, and Alexandria was the intellectual jewel of the Mediterranean. Cleopatra likely had access to the Library of Alexandria, where thousands of scrolls held the knowledge of Egypt, Greece, Persia, and beyond. She studied Homer and Herodotus, mathematics and astronomy, medicine and oratory. She also had a remarkable gift for languages. According to Plutarch, she spoke at least 9, including Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin. Most Ptolemies used translators. Cleopatra spoke to people in their own tongue, but education alone was not enough. Alexandria was not a city of dreams, it was a city of power. Even as a girl, Cleopatra would have witnessed the brutal games of politics, servants executed on suspicion, nobles exiled after whispers, family members watched with cold calculation. She learned how to walk among danger, to speak with authority, to listen more than she spoke. Some say she would disguise herself in plain linen and walk through the markets of Alexandria, listening to common voices and rumors. This may be legend, but it fits the character that history remembers, a queen who knew her people, not just her palace. Her father, always politically vulnerable, was driven from Egypt by an uprising in 58 BCE and spent several years in exile, taking Cleopatra with him. This exile, possibly in Rome or the eastern provinces, taught her something invaluable: how Rome worked. She saw the Roman Senate, its factions and ambitions. She observed its generals, its wealth, its reach. She saw what Egypt meant to Rome, not as an equal, but as a resource. In 55 BCE, with Roman military help, Ptolemy XII reclaimed his throne, but his power was weaker than ever. By the time of his death in 51 BCE, Cleopatra was around 18 years old, already wise, already watching. In his will, Ptolemy declared that Cleopatra should rule jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a child of 10. Following Ptolemaic tradition, they were also to marry a teenage queen, a child king, and a throne poised on the edge of collapse. What followed would be the beginning of Cleopatra's rise, not as a princess, but as a queen in full.
Chapter 3. Rise to Power,
family intrigues. When Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, died in 51 BCE, Egypt did not weep, it held its breath. His rule had been marked by instability, debt, and dependence on Rome. His final act, leaving the throne jointly to Cleopatra and her much younger brother Ptolemy XIII, was meant to ensure continuity. But it only invited chaos. Cleopatra was 18, already politically astute, charismatic, and well-educated. Her brother-husband was 10 years old, surrounded by guardians who saw in him not a ruler, but a tool. Chief among them was Pothinus, a eunuch and regent, and Achilles, a ruthless military commander. These men did not want a capable queen, they wanted control. At first, their efforts to sideline Cleopatra were subtle. Her name was omitted from decrees, her face appeared less frequently on coins, her attendants were replaced. Then came open confrontation. Accused of overstepping her role, Cleopatra was forced from Alexandria altogether. She fled to the eastern Nile Delta, likely to Pelusium, where she began raising an army of loyalists and local allies. Cleopatra, still young, might have given up, faded into the obscurity of exile. But she understood power better than most. She had learned not just how to govern, but how to wait. And then fate intervened in the form of Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, Caesar arrived in Egypt while pursuing his rival Pompey the Great during Rome's civil war. But Pompey had already arrived and had been murdered by Ptolemy XIII's advisors, who believed this would win Caesar's favor. It did not. When Caesar was presented with Pompey's severed head, he was disgusted. Not out of love for Pompey, but because it represented an insult to Rome and an overreach by Egyptian children playing at politics. Sensing opportunity, Cleopatra acted. According to legend, recounted by Plutarch, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's private quarters, possibly wrapped in a carpet or linen sack. Whether true or theatrical, the point remains. She presented herself not as a victim, but as a queen. She spoke Caesar's language, Latin, and appealed not just to his sense of justice, but to his pride, his ambition, and perhaps even his curiosity. Cleopatra understood men of power. She knew when to command and when to charm. Caesar was captivated. He agreed to arbitrate between the rival siblings. His verdict: Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII should rule jointly as their father intended. But this was not merely diplomacy, it was the beginning of Cleopatra's alliance with Rome and something deeper with Caesar himself. Pothinus and Achilles, realizing their influence was crumbling, responded with violence. They besieged Caesar and Cleopatra in the palace. What followed was months of brutal street fighting, the Alexandrian War. Roman reinforcements eventually arrived. Pothinus was executed, Achilles was killed, and Ptolemy XIII, trying to flee, reportedly drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra emerged victorious. Now, sole ruler of Egypt, she married another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, to satisfy tradition. But the real power lay with her. Cleopatra's political survival was not due to beauty, as Roman propaganda later suggested. It was due to intellect, boldness, and timing. She had navigated a palace coup, a Roman civil war, and a siege in her own capital, and won. She would now rule Egypt as a queen in her own right. But she also knew that Egypt's future would no longer be decided by pharaohs alone. The destiny of her kingdom and her own was now bound to Rome. Chapter 4: Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, Love and Alliance. After the flames of war died down in Alexandria, the city exhaled, but Cleopatra did not. She had reclaimed her throne, but not by luck. She had made a calculated gamble, one that brought her face to face with Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, and perhaps the world. And from that moment, their fates would intertwine. At 48, Caesar was a seasoned general, a political genius, and a man not easily impressed. But Cleopatra, barely in her 20s, held his attention. Not with flattery, but with presence. She was unlike any woman he had encountered in Rome. She debated politics. She quoted Homer. She spoke in measured tones, combining elegance with precision. She understood diplomacy, philosophy, astronomy, and empire, not as abstractions, but as tools. To Caesar, she was not just a queen, she was a sovereign equal. What began as an alliance of necessity soon deepened into a personal relationship. Within a year, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, Philometor Caesar, known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. Though Caesar never officially recognized him as heir, the child bore his name, and Cleopatra was confident enough to present him as Caesar's son to the Egyptian people. Caesar did not deny it. Cleopatra remained in Alexandria while Caesar returned to Rome. But their connection endured, and in 46 BCE, she traveled to Rome with Caesarion and her court. Rather than hide in the shadows, she stayed openly in one of Caesar's villas across the Tiber. Her presence in Rome was bold, controversial, and unforgettable. To the Roman elite, she was scandalous. She did not behave like a Roman matron. She dressed in Egyptian linen, wore jewels, and walked with the bearing of a monarch, not a mistress. Rumors spread she was a sorceress, a temptress, a foreign threat. Statues of her appeared alongside Caesar's in public temples, something unthinkable for a living woman. To the people, she was fascination incarnate, a queen who had lived through civil war, a woman who had ruled beside Caesar and bore his child. Whispers followed her wherever she went. But Caesar's ambitions were rising, and with them, danger. He had declared himself dictator for life. His enemies in the Senate feared that Cleopatra and Caesarion would become the beginning of a new monarchy, one rooted not in the traditions of the Roman Republic, but in the divine right rule of the East. Then came the Ides of March. On March 15th, 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated on the floor of the Senate, stabbed 23 times by men who had once called him friend. With his fall, the future of Cleopatra and her son became deeply uncertain. Rome erupted into new civil wars. Cleopatra, understanding the danger, left the city immediately. She sailed back to Alexandria with Caesarion, cloaked in mourning but alive, and once again in control of her destiny. To stabilize her position, she named Caesarion co-regent, not just as her son, but as heir to Caesar's legacy. Egyptian coins bore both their names. Statues showed them side by side. Cleopatra was no longer a young queen in a Roman court. She was the mother of a potential king, a symbol of continuity and defiance. But Rome had not forgotten her. As the Republic crumbled and power fragmented, one question remained. Who would rule the Roman world next? Would it be Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir? Or Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general? Cleopatra waited and watched. Soon, one of them would come to her, and with him, the second great chapter of her legend would begin. Chapter 5. Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Passion and Politics. In the turbulent years following Caesar's assassination, Rome devoured itself once more. The Republic had become a battleground, senators, generals, and heirs, all grasping for power, land, and legitimacy. Two figures rose above the chaos: Octavian, Caesar's young adopted heir, sharp and ambitious beyond his years, and Mark Antony, seasoned commander, master of charisma and war. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, a port city in Asia Minor. He sought her political loyalty and, more importantly, Egypt's wealth. He needed ships, soldiers, and silver to fund his campaign against Caesar's assassins. But Cleopatra never came to beg. She came to conquer. Her entrance into Tarsus became legend. she sailed up the Cydnus River aboard a golden barge with purple sails, reclining beneath a canopy dressed as Isis, goddess of life and magic. Incense perfumed the air, musicians played, attendants flanked her like divine spirits. The people of the city lined the banks in awe. Antony, a lover of theatre and spectacle, was enchanted. But Cleopatra offered far more than charm. She offered political clarity, cultural brilliance, and the power of Egypt behind her. She understood Antony's ambitions. She spoke to his ego and to his need for alliance, not as a subject, but as an equal. And so the alliance deepened. She hosted him lavishly in Alexandria, and what began as strategy blossomed into passion. They dined, laughed, debated, and ruled. Their relationship became personal, political, and over time, unbreakable. Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, in 40 BCE. Later came a third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus. These children were not hidden, they were declared and celebrated. Meanwhile, Antony tried to maintain balance with Rome. He married Octavian's sister Octavia in a calculated attempt at unity. But soon he left her and returned to Cleopatra, igniting scandal across the Roman world. In 34 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra staged the donations of Alexandria, a public ceremony where he granted eastern territories to Cleopatra and their children. Cleopatra was proclaimed Queen of Kings, and Caesarion was named King of Kings, and openly presented as the son of Julius Caesar. To Rome, this was an outrage. Antony had not only spurned a Roman wife, he had crowned a foreign queen and her heirs. Octavian seized the moment. He read Antony's will before the Senate, claiming Antony planned to be buried in Alexandria and give Caesar's legacy to Caesarion. Whether authentic or forged, the effect was the same. The Roman people were furious. Octavian declared war, but not on Antony, on Cleopatra. He painted her as the true enemy, a sorceress, a queen who had ensnared a Roman hero. The war would be framed not as civil conflict, but as a righteous crusade against Eastern corruption. Cleopatra prepared for battle. She and Antony assembled a powerful fleet in western Greece near Actium. Her ships were massive, well-armed, and manned by both Egyptian and Roman forces. She commanded her own squadron and contributed nearly 200 warships to the effort. In 31 BCE, the fateful battle began. The tactics are still debated. Cleopatra's fleet may have been part of a planned withdrawal, or perhaps the tide turned and retreat became necessary. But what is certain is this: Cleopatra's ships left the battle, and Antony followed her. With their departure, the command collapsed. Octavian's general, Agrippa, seized the advantage. Antony's forces surrendered or were destroyed. The war was lost. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, shaken, but not yet defeated. Together they braced for the end. They tried to negotiate. They attempted to rally support. Cleopatra even considered abdicating in favor of Caesarion. But Octavian would not be swayed. He was not seeking peace. He was seeking history. Chapter 6. The Battle of Actium and the Fall of a Dynasty. After their return to Alexandria, Cleopatra and Mark Antony found themselves surrounded, not just by walls, but by fate. The loss at Actium had broken the spine of their resistance. Their fleets were scattered, their allies had fled, and Octavian, now unchallenged, advanced steadily toward Egypt with one goal: to finish what had begun on the floor of the Roman Senate the day Caesar was killed. Still, Cleopatra did not panic. She fortified Alexandria, summoned her remaining forces, and guarded Caesarion. She sent emissaries to Octavian with offers: gold, ships, symbolic surrender. At one point, she even considered sending him Caesarion to be raised in Rome. But Octavian refused all compromise. He knew that as long as Cleopatra lived, she remained a symbol of the East, of royal independence, of a version of Rome he wished to erase. And so the siege began. Antony, whose pride had once commanded legions, now drifted into despair. His soldiers defected, his commanders submitted to Octavian. As his world crumbled, Cleopatra remained focused, negotiating behind closed doors, storing treasure in her tomb, preparing for every outcome, including the worst. Then came the final blow. A false report reached Antony that Cleopatra had taken her life. Whether a rumor or a ploy, it shattered him. Heartbroken and believing all was lost, Antony fell upon his own sword. The wound did not kill him immediately. He was carried, bleeding and gasping, to Cleopatra's hidden tomb. There, in the dim light of torches and incense, he died in her arms. For Cleopatra, the tragedy was complete, but her will remained unbroken. She allowed Octavian to enter the city under the pretense of peace. He visited her, now alone, dressed in mourning, but still proud. She did not beg. She negotiated, calmly requesting that her children be spared and that she not be paraded through Rome in chains. Octavian promised nothing, she understood. In the following days, she prepared her tomb once more, not for treasure, but for herself. She wrote a final note to Octavian and withdrew behind sealed doors with 2 loyal servants. What happened next remains one of history's greatest mysteries. The most famous account comes from Plutarch, who wrote that she arranged to be bitten by an asp, a venomous serpent smuggled into the mausoleum in a basket of figs. Others claim she used poison hidden in a hairpin or salve. Whatever the method, her death was swift and on her own terms. When Octavian's soldiers broke into the tomb, Cleopatra was found lying upon a golden couch dressed as a queen. Her 2 attendants lay beside her, one already dead, the other dying. Cleopatra had died as she had lived, with dignity, calculation, and power over her own story. She was 39 years old. Octavian, though robbed of his trophy, buried her alongside Antony. He executed Caesarion, ending the last blood link to Julius Caesar. Cleopatra's other children were taken to Rome, where they were raised by Octavia, Antony's Roman wife, and so ended the Ptolemaic dynasty. Egypt was now a Roman province. The age of the pharaohs, after more than 3 millennia, was over. But Cleopatra's name had only just begun to echo. Chapter 7. Legacy, Myth and Reality. Cleopatra's death marked the end of an empire, but her legacy, unlike her dynasty, would never be buried. In the immediate aftermath, Octavian, soon to become Augustus, Rome's first emperor, began shaping how history would remember her. To justify his conquest of Egypt and eliminate sympathy for Antony, he allowed Roman writers and poets to create a villain, Cleopatra, as the dangerous seductress, the Eastern enchantress who corrupted noble Roman men. And for centuries, that image stuck. Poets like Horace and Virgil cast her as arrogant and treacherous. Later, Plutarch and Dio Cassius gave us more complex, but still Roman-centric, portrayals. She was often depicted not as a ruler, but as a temptress, a woman who wielded sexuality as a weapon, not intellect as a tool. But the reality was far more nuanced. Cleopatra was not Roman. She ruled by different customs. Her court followed pharaonic traditions. Her titles, her clothing, her religious role, all rooted her in the Egyptian world. She was Isis incarnate, the living goddess of motherhood, healing, and protection. She was also one of the most intellectually accomplished monarchs of her time. She read and wrote in multiple languages, studied medicine and philosophy, governed through famine and civil war, and managed foreign diplomacy in the face of relentless Roman expansion. She was a master of symbolism and image, yes, but also of strategy, negotiation, and cultural synthesis. To Egyptians, she was not a foreign queen. They embraced her. She spoke their language. She participated in their rituals. Her face appeared on coins, not as a passive figure, but with the authority of a king. And to historians today, she is more than the lover of Caesar or Antony. She is a case study in political survival, in statecraft, in female power, in a world that offered women few paths to rule. In the Renaissance, artists reimagined her as a tragic beauty. In the 19th century, she became the ultimate femme fatale. In the 20th, she was immortalized by Hollywood, with Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra casting long shadows over pop culture. Yet behind every interpretation, whether romantic, scandalous, or tragic, remains a woman who lived, led, and lost in the face of empire. She was not a footnote in Roman history. She was the final chapter of pharaonic Egypt. And even now, millennia later, her name commands fascination, because Cleopatra's true power was not only in her reign, but in how she wrote herself into eternity. Chapter 8. Reflections and Good Night. And now, as the sands of history slip quietly through the hourglass, let us pause. We have walked beside Cleopatra from the marble courts of Alexandria to the burning decks of Actium, from whispered alliances to final silence beneath stone. Hers was a life that shimmered with brilliance and burden, one not easily forgotten. She ruled in an age that gave women few choices, and yet she chose again and again. She chose diplomacy over submission, intellect over impulse, and in the end, dignity over disgrace. She loved not blindly, but boldly. She governed not as ornament, but as sovereign. She endured storms of empire, betrayal, and loss, and still wrote her own ending. Her death was not defeat. It was a final act of control. And perhaps that is why we continue to speak her name, not only because she was queen, or brilliant, or beautiful, but because she reminds us of something deeply human. The desire to be remembered not for what we were allowed to be, but for what we dared to become. So now let the stars rise again over Alexandria. Let the Nile return to its calm rhythm. Let the torches dim in the hall of memory. Close your eyes, breathe gently, and rest. You have heard the story of Cleopatra, Queen of Kings, daughter of the Nile, and the final voice of Egypt's ancient soul. Good night.